The Discourse starts right now with Cheryl Oates and Erika Barudis.
Woo-wee! Well, welcome back to The Discourse. It has been a rough week for the Premier and the Minister of Health as the former CEO of Alberta Health Services, Athana Mentzelopoulos, has filed her statement of claim suing the government of Alberta for a $1.7 million ask. And in an unprecedented manner, the minister, Pete Guthrie, has called for the Minister of Health to be shuffled out of her role as the government investigates the allegations. Now, that's a bold-ass move and likely something that cabinet members have something to say about, given that it breaches cabinet confidentiality. If you're watching the news and if you have been watching the news and are trying to grasp how all of this came to be, my lovely co-host Cheryl summarized it in her very personalized, colorful way on last week's episode, so check that out to get completely brought up to speed. So this story, she ain't going anywhere, and the government has been relatively quiet, perhaps until they file their statement of defense, which they say is coming in the next few weeks. But they are dancing a fine line of perception taking over and causing real harm to the trust and political capital that the Premier has worked so hard to establish. Now, I've been saying for about 2 weeks that they need to say something because the quiet look over here where you've got the shiny thing in Washington wasn't really resonating or sticking on Alberta turf. So finally on Wednesday afternoon, Premier and the Minister of Health addressed the media on the AHS and Alberta Health allegations. Take a listen.
Thank you, everyone. I'm joined this afternoon by Minister of Health, Adriana LaGrange, and I want to address the procurement issues at Alberta Health Services in the context of our relentless pursuit of better health care for all Albertans. I think all Albertans would agree that wait times for surgeries are too long. Hip replacements, knee replacements, and cataract surgeries are examples. And we've made progress on shortening those wait times, but they still remain too long. At its heart, that's what the questions have been raised are all about. There are people both inside and outside of government who are okay with the status quo. Some, either because of ideology or to protect their interests, accept the current results. I do not.
Last week, the former CEO of AHS filed a statement of claim. Upon review, the allegations and claims that have been made against me are false, while others will have to be investigated further as part of the Auditor General's work and the government's external third-party investigation that is being set up by Deputy Minister McPherson. We will be filing our statement of defense in the coming weeks and will be vigorously, and I mean vigorously, defending against this claim.
Well, they said something, but I'm going to just ask you if you're enjoying watching these allegations come out for the government.
Not enjoying. Like, if any of these allegations are true, I will be really disappointed as a taxpayer, as an Albertan, as someone who cares deeply about our public healthcare system. I will be really disappointed. And I'm just going to go out on a limb on this press conference today, because if we're doing a segment of what would Cheryl do for once,
love that for you.
This is not what I would have done. And I think when this comes down, when we get the details here and all the information comes out, I think the Premier and the Minister of Health are going to regret what they said today.
How come?
I just think, first, there's so much information in the allegations. If any of it is proven true, they just stood up there without having even started an investigation and said none of it is true. And, usually, I'm not saying this will end this way, but usually, when something comes out where there's smoke, there's fire, there's at least something going on. And if that is the case, and there has been at least even a little bit of wrongdoing, they don't look very good standing up there saying nothing to see here, this is all AHS's fault, which is, in summary, what they said.
And I don't think that that's how the media is going to report it. So I would agree that I don't think that the headlines are going to come out in their favor. Now, I don't know if they were even going in expecting to have headlines, or just the fact that they've been kind of crapped on for not showing up or talking or anything like that. I do think that they did come out. If you can't come out humble, and I think in this state,
it was not humble.
No, it wasn't. It was like, you got to go forceful. And I think that they did have like a more dominant tone than what we've seen in the past in the Premier statement, in the interviews that the Minister of Health did last week. This was a little bit more like, we are innocent. These allegations are false. They both said it to kick off their speaking remarks. I think that's what they wanted to get on the record. It was very clear that they're speaking for themselves. And so they did get a lot of follow-up questions on that. But I don't know how this landed. I think that the questions after the press conference were probably not something that they're going to look back and be like, we nailed it. There might be some walking back, and we can get into that. But I do have to say, after like saying, come out here, say something, do something, at least they are doing what they've alluded to. So I don't know if this is like press conference worthy, but that independent third party that should have happened from day one should have been announced. They did come out and announce that and put parameters around the minister. The new or now just Alberta Health Services CEO Andre Tremblay have a new deputy minister of health of Alberta Health, and someone who we both know and respect, Chris McPherson, overseeing the independent investigation on behalf of the Alberta, on behalf of Alberta. He's the deputy minister, or was, for JET, Jobs, Economy and Trade. And so he's kind of like, I've got nothing to do with this. I got nothing involved, nothing involved, and he can do that. So
can we just, I would just like to just take a second and just say, and just poke a couple holes in the things that were said today, because the government has basically held out until now making a public statement on this, and perhaps for good reason, as they get their legal strategy together. It is always a tough balance between legally what creates a liability and the communication strategy. Yeah. But there were so many holes. Like, first, the allegations are partially against Andre Tremblay. So to me, get Andre Tremblay out of there, not entrench him further and leave him as the sole administrator of AHS. Get him out of there so that everybody, it's clear that he does not have the power to manipulate anything. Secondly, when
Can I just ask something on that? Do you mean like he's gone all together? Because then it looks like they're throwing him under the bus. I agree that if he was to stay in Alberta Health, not AHS, that might look better, but I want to get your take on that.
Deputy ministers are shuffled all the time for far smaller reasons than this. Maybe Andre Tremblay is completely innocent. That has yet to be determined. But while people are wondering whether he had something to do with this, get him out of health and get him out of AHS.
And that's coming because, like, where you and
that's
I disagree. You think the same with the Minister of Health, and I disagree.
Get her out of there.
Okay. And so, but do you not, I don't know. I disagree with taking them out of there, because I think that there's still other work to be done. This is on get the investigation out. Like, I mean, where do you stop? You ask the Premier to also, like, I know Nenshu said that, and that's kind of like an out to lunch comment.
For me, as a citizen, like, I've watched this really closely and I've watched a lot of the detail of it, but most Alberta citizens have not. They understand that there's a scandal that involves AHS and involves Alberta Health, and that there are allegations against the people at the heads of those organizations. So if you want confidence, if you want the public to have confidence in a massive reorganization that continues to move forward, get the two people who, there are allegations against these two people, get them out of there so the public can have confidence in the many big tasks that Alberta Health and Alberta Health Services has in front of it. To me, that's clean. Then if anything comes out saying something untoward happened, there is really a scandal here, you've already removed them. You haven't left them to make the problem bigger.
Yeah, I do think, and I know we'll get to this, I think that there's a lot of that call within cabinet or within the opposition that strategically there's benefit of keeping the Minister of Health as the Minister of Health. I do agree with you that I think Andre Tremblay should not be the AHS CEO, and it would be better if you're going to leave them, put him in health. I don't think that you could find many people that might take that job, though. So maybe that was part of the mix of, like, we tried to do this. Well, I mean, you're going to be in the news, right? Just trying to do your job. And if you're coming in, you're probably wanting to do reforms, which I don't really think is what they're going to be focused on. So it's like, here's a shit sandwich job. I don't think there's a lot of people jumping up and down wanting to take that role, even if the Premier's asking you or the minister's asking you to do it.
Okay, so let's move to my second issue with what was said today, which is the government has committed, the Premier has now committed to an independent review. Great, check. That's awesome. We should have an independent review. The problem is that she has committed to an independent review on the wrong topic. I, as a citizen of Alberta, do not want an independent review into AHS's procurement practices. I, as a citizen of Alberta, want an independent review into the allegations that have been made against the government, against those involved in the government, that suggest that public contracts paid for by taxpayer dollars are being manipulated for the benefit of people inside the government or close to the government. That is what I want an independent review into. I don't want an independent review into procurement practices. And for the record, Adriana LaGrange gave herself the power over procurement back in October. So we should have all the line of sight into procurement practices we need.
Yeah, and so just for our listeners that didn't watch the presser on Wednesday afternoon, essentially they went over a timeline of 8 months, saying that she had asked repeatedly of the former CEO for any allegations, proof, everything. It was not given to her. And so there was 8 months back and forth with no clear line of sight from the Minister of Health into, quote unquote, what was going on in AHS. And so I do question, like, I mean, if someone's not doing what I want for 8 months, they're probably gone 6 months ago.
But also, but even on that, to say, like, so she could say, I have no idea. I kept asking. I kept asking. She didn't give me information. But there was information because she took it to the board. The board said you should go to the RCMP. She was about to take it to the Auditor General. So the idea that Adriana LaGrange would fire her in the middle of all of that without knowing what was going on, that just doesn't add up. Like, it just doesn't make sense. So she says, I don't know what's in your review, but I'm going to get rid of you. Just before
and I don't think the timing of, like, and I don't know what they can share or not, but if I look at it, you're not firing someone like yesterday or today for something that's coming out tomorrow. Like, I suspect that there was not a performance review, but questions about her, and like, you don't want to fire someone unless you coach people into that.
Then that's like,
and so, but like, I think they should say
tactics.
that yeah, I'm not disagreeing. I'm saying, like, there's hopefully in this statement of defense, a lot of these answers. I would say now I've pivoted from maybe don't talk so much, because I don't think that press release, and like, at least the question and answers, I think I thought their statements that they read were probably hitting the right tone of, like, I think answering some of those questions, reassuring that this has been taken seriously. If it is an independent third party, I have confidence that if the independent third party feels like we need to go beyond that procurement and look at those relationships that were happening with, and from the allegations, you'd already been kind of pointed in a direction that they should absolutely follow that path as the independent third party investigators, and they would probably flag that. So I do think that your claims of, like, it needs to look at the allegations, I suspect that that's all part of it, because I don't know how you could avoid that on procurement.
The Premier explicitly said it wasn't, though. Like, she was asked and she said it wasn't part of it, that this would specifically, she hammered AHS, saying that AHS has been holding up transformation in the healthcare system and reform in the healthcare system. This is all AHS's fault, and we're going to bring in a third party to look at what AHS has been doing and whether their procurement practices are correct. That's not the investigation I'm looking for.
Right, but I think when you look at that investigation, if Athana's allegations are correct, there is either paper trail or comments or anything like that would be a part of that. So whether the Premier is hoping for that, I do think in the due process that will be grander scope. I can't imagine.
I can't imagine if this is just a look at the procurement practices. What is outstanding, or what really I hold on to from the statement of claim that the former CEO has made, is the outstanding ownership of Alberta Surgical Group. So in that document, she alleges that 12% of ownership has not been disclosed. And you would think that that's a normal practice, that actually the procurement practice demands that the ownership be disclosed. But in this case, it has not been disclosed. And then her statement of claim goes on to allege that there may be people inside government that are actually receiving kickbacks or takes for these kind of contracts. And we don't know who the owners are. So for me, that's like question number one of any investigation, is who owns this group, and is anyone involved in a conflict of interest when the government signs a deal with them? That's number one. I don't care about procurement practices.
Yeah, I would want both, actually. Like, I think we've talked about, like, wanting the truth, wanting the answers, and whether that's the original request of the procurement or this independent third party. I do think politically those answers need to be also addressed, whether it's indirectly through this request or it's as a byproduct of this request for an independent third party, because that's where the political capital is being drained right now, and that's where the trust in confidence is. I don't think that the big swings at AHS, like, I know AHS is not functioning. I know for a long time it hasn't been functioning. I know that, like, there's a lot that can be done to make this better. The reforms I still support, but, like, I don't think taking a swing at AHS right now is maybe the most politically finessed approach.
It just looked like a complete deflection. And like everything she said could be absolutely true, but someone comes and says, we're worried that the government is conflicted and not acting in the best interest of Albertans. And she's like, well, AHS sucks. Like that's such, like there's no ownership there at all. Like I think perhaps every single thing that she said was true today, but it was tone deaf to the frustration that Albertans are feeling about this file.
Yeah, I again, the Q&A, not a knock out of the park in any way. I did think the statements, though, and I want to get your like the tone, as I said, was like quite strong. There was words like, and this is from the Minister of Health. She used like vigorous. The Premier used relentless. They both were like, these allegations against us are false. I thought that it was the right tone in the little instance that one of those sound bites gets captured and played or highlighted in a news story, that at least, the people that don't follow politics as much as we do were like, oh, they're saying that this isn't true. And I suspect that, like, again, I've said, I don't think these two are the villains, meaning like who are the bad guys in this operation. And in politics, sometimes you like need a villain. I know when we were on Alberta at Noon yesterday, I said like the difference with Alison Redford in this case, with either Adriana LaGrange or the Premier, is that like Alison Redford was painted the villain. I don't think either of these folks are. And so I think that that's why they were very specific. They can say this, probably cleared by the lawyers, to say these are false. I do think the government needs to get that damn statement of defense out, though.
Yeah, and certainly they're doing everything they possibly can to make sure that AHS is the villain in this. The devil will be in the details. Like, I don't think any Albertan today has pivoted away from asking many questions about what's going on here and what the government and the UCP's role is in this. I don't think that press conference did anything to stop the questions from coming. In fact, following that press conference, I think there's probably a lot more questions about what's going on. So I completely agree. Like we've been saying, they got to get out there. They got to say something. But I'm not sure that what they said today really moved the ball forward for their side of the story.
Well, and in any other circumstance, I think this would have just been a news release. But I think they put themselves up because it also shows we're not scared of this process. We'll take your questions, fire away. We are confident that we are, in the right here. And so a lot of it, I think, was the fact that they did a press conference, that they showed up, they took the bullets, and that they remained adamant of their position. Now, how many statements of claim? Because this is one thing that I picked up on when we're talking about, or statements of defense, sorry.
Yeah.
The Premier alluded to, when asked about her former Chief of Staff, Marshall Smith, said, well, I assume he'll be making a statement of defense, and then was kind of like, well, he's not in the lawsuit.
And then was kind of like, whoops.
Yeah. And I'm
Maybe
like, man, so now I'm like, how many statements of defense? Because like Andre's in there, the minister, another minister is in there, Marshall, some other individuals on the private procurement side. So now I'm like, oh my gosh, how many statements of defense are we going to see from this? Definitely, obviously, LaGrange.
Why wouldn't they all submit a statement of defense?
Yeah. I'm not surprised. I just thought it was like an interesting thing. So I'm like, question follow-ups. I'm like, how many statements of defense and who's going to be like first out of the gate?
So what's the next step?
Well, I mean, I think the statement of defense is like so needed. I have more details. I think some of the other questions are like where, even in the interview, there was still questions about this. Oh my gosh, why can't I remember what it's called? The legal conflict wall that they discussed to make sure that it's, I'm like, why are you laughing?
Because there's a legal conflict wall and a SharePoint. Don't worry, Albertans,
I was like,
we've
because
got this under control. No. I just think it's just not very, like, their job today was to go out and say, like, we've got this under control. It's completely transparent. It's completely independent. We hear your frustration. We're frustrated too. We're working on it. But when you do that and in the same statement say, we've set up a SharePoint folder and don't worry, we're going to leave.
Tactics were not needed to be disclosed.
The minister
today.
And then the head of AHS will stay where they are, but don't worry, we're going to put up a fake wall so they will not be conflicted because, those have always worked in the...
It's like I envision like a partition in an office, just being like,
so just popping over the top of it.
I think it's real. It's just what happened was with they're getting into the tactics and maybe some oversharing didn't make it sound more feasible or like more confidence was instilled. I still, again, like I think there's
does not give me confidence.
I know how to use one and I can barely use technology. Like, go me. But no, I think that the other thing that we maybe want to address is, because I think this is going to continue playing on, is, and they did have cabinet on Wednesday, and the last time that they had cabinet, a leak came out. So one of them would also be like, make sure that there's unity within. I believe there is, but maybe let's just talk about
Doesn't
our
sound
little.
like it.
Okay, well, I'll let you introduce what lovely Mr. Guthrie did last week and maybe talk about it.
So last week, we'll call it a memo, was leaked to the CBC that one of the cabinet ministers, Minister Guthrie, had written to his cabinet colleagues, basically reiterating his comments in the cabinet meeting that Minister LaGrange should be moved out of the health portfolio. And this, I mean, it's crazy for a number of reasons. One is for anyone who, doesn't know about cabinet confidence, the people in that room are trusting each other that they're going to have an honest and open, a vigorous discussion on anything. And then no one is going to repeat that conversation outside the room or talk about it because they have cabinet confidence. They believe that that is a sacred room where those conversations stay in the room. So one, it is wacky. I'm going to use that word instead of fishy today. It's crazy that a minister would feel the need to reiterate their comments in an email in writing. That never happens unless you plan to leak your comments to someone. And so it seems likely that in this case, those comments were put on paper to leak to the press. And it does show that around the cabinet table, there is no consensus that the minister should stay in her role or that no wrongdoing has occurred.
Yeah, and I still think, like, and one of the other things is, once you have that, some of your conversations, then you're more apprehensive, right?
Yeah.
So you might not have those transparent things because of this individual or individuals that are leaking stuff out of the room, because how can you be vulnerable and transparent when you might find your comments on the front page of the newspaper? Coming back, like, I've shared, like, Pete Guthrie is a friend of mine. He was on the transition team with me with Premier Smith. So I did ask him straight up, did you leak this? He said, no, I did not. I said, okay, well, I'll take you for your word. However, you know how stupid it is to put anything in writing, and that, like, that chance, like, politics 101, don't put anything in writing unless you are okay with it being on the front page of the Sun. Maybe the Sun's term is dated now, like a little bit more, but that was kind of the rule. And so it was like, you had to understand that there was at least a chance of sending this out, that it could get into the hands, and it did, into the hands of CBC's Jason Markusoff. And he was able to report on all these step by step. Like, it's not just like, I don't agree with this, and I think Adriana LaGrange should be shuffled out. It was detailed, with some specific calls to action. So I don't know. I think that they've got to deal with that internal stuff and be very transparent with their cabinet as much as they can, given, maybe a lack of confidence that cabinet confidentiality will stay. So a little bit of also house cleaning on their own end.
And what's telling to me is, and maybe this isn't the case, I don't know the internal dynamics of the UCP cabinet as well as you do, but if you are breaking cabinet confidence, if your colleagues believe that you're breaking cabinet confidence, there's a real risk that you end up on the outside of cabinet. Mm-hmm. And so to me, if this was calculated, if Minister Guthrie wrote an email, had someone, obviously not him, leak the email, he's risking his cabinet position. Mm-hmm. He's putting his cabinet position at risk for this. Ministers don't do that unless they believe that there's something up. Like, he's willing to go to bat for this issue. He's willing to risk his cabinet mm-hmm. position to have Adriana LaGrange move to another position. That says a lot to me.
Yeah, and that's definitely, again, that's that inside baseball that we would know. I don't think now that the Premier's office can shuffle him, because that doesn't look very good on their behalf. Yeah. And sometimes it's better to keep people in positions than let them go rogue and, make them be a backbencher, and they have a lot more time on their hands to go cause trouble. So
she loves a contrarian.
You're just going to applaud him for it. But no, and I think that, we'll see if there's merit to why he felt that. I still am disappointed that he would go that way, even if he did feel as strongly as you're alluding, because I think this is a team sport, and he definitely was looking out for himself. And maybe that was because his ethics or his own values mm-hmm. and beliefs were very drive, but there is, like, a lot more on the line as a cabinet minister that, you're probably not going to get your favorite portfolio down the line because you weren't a team player. And I mean, to be in the news talking about that is a big FU that I don't think can ever be overlooked. Now, there was some messaging that came out about like, you need to deal with this. You need to be talking about it. One thing we do know for sure that's coming next is the premier is not going back to Washington.
You know, this, I think, I mean, I'm sure there's a number of reasons, including how poorly the last trip went. But I think this also is an example of just how quickly a government can be pulled off message. Like, of course, we look to British Columbia, where David Eby is just leaning so hard into the economic message. They just did a throne speech earlier this week with like wartime imagery in it as they position him as the guy who's standing up against Trump for all British Columbians. A week ago, 2 weeks ago, Danielle Smith was doing the exact same thing and doing it very, very successfully. And you would think that had this scandal, had this statement of claim not been filed, last week's meeting aside, she'd be down there. She'd be doing the same thing. And she'd be setting up her own meetings on the side and taking victory laps on it. So it really is telling that Albertans they feel that Albertans don't have the patience for her to do that right now.
Yeah. And I mean, it also could, part of it is like, she's gone through all of this. This would be like her third rodeo of meeting with all the right people. And you know what, after last week's like not a non-successful mission, let's call it, maybe she was just like, listen, I've already built the relationships. I can continue those conversations from home. There was mention in the National Post article stating that, you know, one of the reasons why is she's decided to remain in Alberta this week to prepare for the budget that will be released next week. And then it was like that we need to make sure Albertans have resources they need to deal with the uncertainty we face from the tariff threats and the potential inflation that could cause.
I just think that's funny that anyone believes that the budget's not written and printed already.
Well, yeah. And I do wonder if there's like something to do with some of the messaging or some of the like implications. Or, you know, like the budget's it's printed. It's ready to go. I don't think there's changes to the budget per se. I think that maybe it's on how they approach it and the tone that they really need to precondition, which I think would be appropriate given when this was all going through the process. This was kind of more of a farce or a fiction than a reality of what we're seeing. So it might be more on like the positioning, the comms positioning, the potential of like projections of what we could see from oil and gas or how inflation will impact it. But they're not rewriting stuff.
I think she needs to be at home because of the AHS scandal. Like whether she's met with a whole bunch of governors or whether she's had her meetings in the US or not, her mission, her number one mission has always been a communications exercise to make sure that Albertans thought that she was first and foremost going there to stand up for them and stand up for our industry. There's no reason that would end now. Like despite the Premier's meeting last week, there's no reason for her to stop doing that. This is the number one issue and will continue to be the number one issue as we approach March 4th, the day that the tariff 30-day pause ends. So there's really no reason for her to back off of it except for a new scandal, an issue has arisen that has serious implications for her government, and she needs to stay home and deal with it.
Yeah, and I think that is a piece of it. Sometimes I'm like, well, what is she going to do? Like, you've already moved it to an independent inquiry. The Auditor General's doing their job. It can take up to like a couple of months to get that done. So, you know, part of me is like, do you just sit there and be like, fuck? Like, you know, what are some of the things that tactically you can do now that you've actually like created the plan for it to operate? Like, I mean, you know, you kind of, there's also business of the day. And so I do hope that she is focusing still on Washington and those relationships. I do believe that she can do that from home, but it is probably consuming her and it's consuming this government, right? Like even in the Alberta health world, their focus now isn't so much on continuing to look at those reforms in place, but it's now shifted towards, you know, the quote unquote distractions.
Yeah.
And you go ahead.
I was just going to say, if we take her at her word, and her word has always been, I knew nothing of this. She said in her most recent press conference, I didn't know what Marshall Smith was up to. He did his own thing, as many staff do. If we take her at her word that she knew nothing, and the government is in this position where for the first time since she's been premier, she is really facing a public challenge, a public confidence issue, I would stay home and deal with it too. Like,
even just the emotional exhaustion that this also
and make sure,
causes.
Like sit on it and make sure nothing else happens. Don't let this not get worse while you take a trip to Washington. If I was her, if I knew nothing about it and my government was in this position because of things that other people had done, I would also be sitting in my office making sure that it went smoothly going forward.
And I don't disagree. Just being like actionable. Like, again, there is a process in place that she is not involved in. But I too would want to help control this and make sure that nothing was worse or that nothing else was getting actioned without this being the primary priority. But you wouldn't tell the National Post that.
No. But I mean, like, there will be more stories. I know, like, there will be more stories between now and the time that this review comes out. And every day that there's a news story, the Premier's office and the Minister's office and AHS is going to have to collectively decide, how do we deal with that story? And if I was the Premier, I would say, I have a seat at this table now. Perhaps it was only Alberta Health before, but I'm at the table now.
Yep. And you know, you've had trust in me, and like maybe you're questioning my government, because a lot of this is at the Smith government, not at Premier Smith. So maybe it's just even the symbolism of her taking the helm and being like, I wasn't involved in this, but yeah, now I'm at the table, that will actually help. Because as we've said, and Carrie Tate said on Ryan Jesperson a couple weeks ago, and we played that clip last week, is that she does have more grace. She does have more, like, you know, Albertans like her more and want to trust her. And so that could actually kind of be a strategy to pivot away from all these pointing fingers that we're seeing right now. But Lord knows this is not over. Like, the statement of defense, when that comes out, is a whole nother 5-day news story. And that's just one of potentially 3 or 4 that we're gonna see come out.
So how do you think they do this? I mean, they have to be scrambling to get that statement of defense out. Like,
yeah, but I don't
think,
like, I know we've talked about this, but like, how do you scramble facts and like back and forths and lawyers? And for everyone's context, like, you know, politics want to overshare things, as we saw at a press conference. Lawyers want to like lawyer it down. So it's like that balance between the transparency piece and the legal piece that I think sometimes, I've never lived this, but like take a lot of back and forth, that she's like, you know, even Adriana's statement of defense has probably been shared. It's now like what goes on paper and what is, like, you know, what are we comfortable with as lawyers?
Yeah.
Which is weird to think.
What I was going to say is, how do they now get that statement of defense out as fast as possible and not step on their own budget? It's impossible.
Yeah. You know, I at first thought that they might come out before budget and try and deal with it. I don't know how long these take, but when they say weeks and it's like, you know, less than a week to budget, I don't think you would keep reiterating. And I think LaGrange said it at least twice, maybe 3 times. My statement of defense will be out in the coming weeks. So to me, that is plural, and that is after budget.
Still, though, like, everybody
Nate Horner might want his budget just be like, fuck, forget about it, let's go. Because I think it's going to be tight. I think it's going to be, you know, we all knew this was going to be a tough budget anyway, but yeah, they're still going to, all the ends are going to be about that. I don't see even, you know, difficult decisions in the budget, or the good news stories that also get covered during budget, getting or no longer newsworthy.
This is what I would be worried about, is like, everybody loves that. Every comms person, speaking as a comms person, loves the post-budget rollout. Like, you do your thing. You talk about, like, if in my case, like, every budget was about the debt and deficit on budget day. And then you get to go out into communities and say, we're going to build you a school. We're going to upgrade your hospital. We're going to build this cool infrastructure project. We're going to build the Calgary Cancer Center. Like, that is the good part, when you get to go sell your government to communities across the province. And that is going to be, at least it looks like it will be, overshadowed by the current allegations against the government. So that's going to be tough for them.
Yeah, I assume even local media, like your friendly rural weeklies, that you go out and be like, we got a new school, we've got a new road. And they're like, cool, AHS, we want to talk about that. And it's not about the hospital that you're building or not building here. It's about like, what the hell is going on? That's really tough. And it's really tough for caucus and cabinet morale. So I do think, though, knowing Premier Smith, she's pretty honest and will walk them through in cabinet and caucus as much as she can, because she's worked her ass off to get that team dynamic. And I don't think that this is something that she wants to lose it on. She can become an even better leader within by that humility and that honesty. And I suspect she will take that approach, just knowing her. That's at least the benefit, is that there's other leaders we've seen, even in my own movement, that don't ever show that side of themselves or have that trust in sharing that information. So that is, I think, a secret weapon that she's got that maybe she will be able to use. Well, for our last segment of the show, it's a little bit different. It is still within healthcare, but maybe something that's not as front page newsworthy. And that, like, with all these distractions, though, I know, Cheryl, you and I have talked a lot about like the reforms that the government has spent the better part of their mandate, which is coming up to 2 years now, talking about this generational reform. And it has lost, obviously, momentum in Alberta. Even for those that previously supported it, might now be looking at, okay, are we doing all the right things, just given some of the allegations that have come out. So not only is Alberta Health Services under scrutiny, but also some of, I think, the great work that the government has put into place for these reforms may now be also looked at differently.
Well, and I think at least a lot closer. Like, I think people are saying, like, you know, if there's questions around this, what else is there questions around? And they will be looking at those healthcare reforms and scrutinizing each one of those pillars. And I know specifically when it comes to mental health, you have some, you know, as yourself as a conservative supporter, as someone who's supported the reorganization, you have concerns over some of the decisions that they've made.
Yeah, so I don't want to call it a silver lining, but I do hope that through all of this, there is some rethink happening. And this may, again, like may not be top of mind to people. It probably went under the radar. It was a news release missed amongst all the other stuff, but something that really caught my attention. And I hope that this is a way that a proof point to the government that maybe we need to rethink the mental health and addictions pillar. And, you know, where I see it is maybe not dissolving the ministry per se, but that we need to dissolve what it does, because we do see mental health and addictions across all of our healthcare system in primary, acute, continuing care, as well as places like the education system. And that, like, I'm really glad that the government did talk about mental health, because we have criticized that office was only talking about addictions, and did highlight the importance of early dedication and intervention in some of these mental health areas.
I think you're talking about the announcement where the government recently put $10 million to private companies to operate what it's calling a first of its kind eating disorders home in Calgary. With Silver Linings and Edgewood Health Network Canada. So $10 million over 3 years for 12 beds. So that's 52 patients a year, down from what was originally put in the 2023 budget. And like many of their announcements, no input from the community on this one. This was just a top-down decision in terms of putting this where it's now living in this pillar.
Yeah, and my criticism on this announcement isn't actually the like giving money to a private company for public delivery if they can offer a better service than our primary and acute care. But that's not the case. So you did highlight a lot of my concerns. It was a lot of money. You know, the ROI I don't really see for 12 beds. That's, you know, $3.3 million every year. And it's just located in Calgary. And it is based on a recovery model as opposed to the early detection and supports that maybe individuals with eating disorders need. This one really stood out because it does hit home for me as someone that like has dealt with eating disorders for much of my adult life, like all of my 20s. And so for me, I was like, this just misses the mark from a policy. It didn't have, you know, the community saying this is a good idea. It was like the minister, Recovery Alberta, which is paid by government, and then these two private entities supporting it. I will say I did reach out to the Premier's office, to the Minister's office, talked to several of them. I don't know if necessarily, and this was recently, if I have or will get the answers that maybe I'm looking for, but I did get response and an appreciation for me reaching out. I don't think it's going to overturn this decision, but hopefully it will make them look at it differently, because I do think there was a lot of policy misses here that just really aren't going to help individuals with eating disorders or hit that early intervention mark that I think it was maybe intending to.
So can you talk about that a little bit? Like, I think it's really brave that you want to talk about this publicly. And like, I haven't gone through this. So talk about like why what they've set up.
Yeah.
Why won't it work for those experiencing eating disorders, and what would a better system have been?
Yeah. And so I can only speak for myself. Like I said, I dealt with it for lots of my life. And I feel like it's if I have this platform to talk about the need to do this. Is $10 million necessary? Absolutely. Do I think it should be reallocated? And I did in my letter to the minister say, like, you should put 1/3 in primary care, 1/3 in acute care, because early detection is usually found at your primary care provider. Unfortunately, for some, it's found in the acute care when you're going in and you need a feeding tube. And, you know, I've had friends that have been hospitalized. I've never had that type of intervention. Like, it was more, you know, I don't know how to like scale it, but it was never in a place where I needed intervention to that level. And so I think it's really important to realize that this early detection is so important, especially knowing that your bones don't stop growing until 26. And so at that point, if you've done any damage to your bones, which for females, and in my case, like is low bone density, it's a super big thing that can impact the rest of your life. And so that early detection is so critical. The government did announce some mental health supports, and I think there should be more of the eating disorder and body image, especially with social media and all the things we're seeing now. More, and maybe that last $3 million allocated there for education and prevention and just healthy body image and healthy eating initiatives that could go into the education program. I did recommend to the minister and the premier's office that like it should almost become like red tape reduction. And it might sound weird, but when you look at mental health and addictions, that impacts every industry. It impacts every person, especially during COVID. I think we all got more comfortable with like mental health diagnoses and talking about it. And I think there's still a long way to go. But for people to be able to, have that implemented, like their job is to go find places where the government needs to change mental health or addictions or policies or investment. So it's almost like reverse of what it's doing, because right now I think it's kind of just a flashy child with like very little to show. Or alternatively, put it under health and have those just be 3 pillars as a journey of someone's life where mental health and addictions can always be there, on a need for intervention or.
Yeah. And that has been some of the criticism of this before, right? Is that for some people and some conditions and some medical needs, pushing it into a silo is actually hurting the person who's looking for, more fulsome care. So basically what you're saying is, I just want to make sure that I have this right. Like they're proposing that eating disorders be treated with sort of like a live-in recovery model, much like the addiction recovery model that they've implemented. And you're saying like you'll just miss a whole bunch of people who are suffering if you do it that way.
Yes. And so when it comes back to the specific announcement, it seems like it's on the recovery, like some of the conversations and things. It doesn't seem like it's on the, like, from what I've read, and I could be wrong, of what these facilities do is like, it's not for feeding tubes. You also have to do a lot of tests. Like I mentioned, bone density, your blood, the enamel in your teeth and the damage you can have to your teeth as part of bulimia, or the reason and the root cause isn't being addressed. And the root cause can sometimes be the need for control, dealing with a trauma, depression, anxiety, many other things that like a wraparound service, such as a hospital or your primary care physician, I think has more skill and resources. The other thing is the fact of alienation, right? Like I have friends that have gone to addiction treatment centers and they kind of just disappear. And rightfully so, they need to remove themselves. But I think when they come back, sometimes we've had close friends that it's really hard to share that because you've gone away. When you say I'm in the hospital for a month, I think it's a lot different. And I visited friends in the hospital during this, and there's specific wards, but there's also all the other access to care that you can get if you need it. Again, I think it's not getting to the root cause. It's not addressing the issue, and it's not truly getting, again, through that early intervention where I think the money should and could be better used.
Yeah. And honestly, like there are people who are dealing with a multitude of problems across the province. Like this is an example, like you've lived this, the problems. You can, like, when they make this announcement, you can picture exactly where the roadblocks would have been for you trying to access care. I don't think that's specific just to eating disorders. I think that's across the healthcare system. There are a whole bunch of examples that you could take and say, this would be better served if there was a wraparound service, like say one entity looking after health in Alberta.
And I don't think that the pillars are going to be that barrier. Just like it's kind of like its own lone thing operating over here, which should actually be flowing through all of them. So I still support those 3 pillar systems because I do think that's a natural journey of life and your point of care within the healthcare system. And hopefully it is seamlessly integrated with those wraparound services. I know we'll probably continue to have differing opinions. This is one that obviously, like I shared with you, I really wanted to talk about it because it is a lived experience and it's like a way to explain how policy can work or not work, and that like the need to look like I would have never gone to a home because the home situation is like, to me, alienating, right? Like I had been to hospitals and specialists and lots of things like that and had to take hormones for a long time. But it's like, I could do that all through my primary care provider and a specialist. And so I didn't need to go to a home. and my counselor and stuff like that, that like I didn't have to like remove myself. And I think there's a lot of things with this recovery model that don't fit the recovery model because like you're always going to have food. Like there's a lot of things with the mental health that you'll never recover in the same way that you might from avoiding alcohol or addictions. And I haven't dealt with that, but I just think we're trying to do one size or like one shoe fits all. And it just, to me, was like, blah, I can't not talk about this mess.
Yeah, and I think too, because not everyone feels comfortable speaking up about their own experiences like you just have, there just isn't as much noise around it. Like you don't have a whole chorus of people saying this wasn't my experience, this wouldn't have worked for me, because this stuff's hard to talk about and not everyone's comfortable doing it.
Yeah, but there are groups for that. Obviously, anyone that's experiencing that, get in contact with some of those. Maybe we'll throw some in the show notes, but there's also like the minister's job to do that consultation and like get that support and third party validation, which was one of my criticisms, was like, where's the community on this?
Okay, well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, well, no, thank you. And thanks for welcoming this conversation as well.
Yeah. So next week is a big week in Alberta politics. Maybe we'll see a statement of defense or two. Maybe we will see more information. Maybe there'll be some more stories on AHS and also the budget. So too much to jam into one episode. So we're just so excited to bring you double episodes next week.
Cheryl just likes to hang out with me, really. But no, we're going to do kind of like a pre and post budget because budget comes out on Thursday. So we'll have our regular show on the Thursday morning about some projections and just getting you guys brought up to whatever gets fired our way in Alberta politics. And then we'll have a budget specific episode that will air on Friday morning. So with that, make sure, because you don't only set your alarm once, but twice, that new episodes drop Thursday at 5 a.m. and that you can follow us on X, Instagram, and TikTok.
And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.
The Discourse is hosted by Cheryl Oates and Erika Barudis. Follow on Instagram at The Discourse Pod. Subscribe to The Discourse on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.